Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Planet Ready podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Spin Global, a public benefit corporation that exists to disrupt disasters from neighborhoods to nations. And don't forget to check out PlanetReady.com, the world's premier online disaster risk reduction and emergency preparedness platform for individuals, families, houses of worship, businesses, and governments. And remember, Planet Ready brings preparedness where people are. Our guest today on the podcast is Sara Homan. Let's listen to a story of hers and learn from the impact it had on her life.
Okay, I'd like to just share a quick story of a disaster that had an impact, profound impact on my life. Was the Great Flood of '93. It happened in Quincy, Illinois during August. I was a recent high school graduate, and I was just enjoying my summer with my friends. The Mississippi River that year had a flood of historic proportions. It was a 500-year flood, which isn't a big deal now because everything that seems to be happening these days is pretty historic. But at this time in '93, this was just something we had never seen before. There's a lot of different angles you can take on this disaster and how it impacted people up and down the Mississippi and displaced people. But one of the things that triggered a lot of emotion for me in reflecting on this disaster and how it changed me moving forward in my personal life and in my career was that there was a massive displacement of people in small communities throughout the state of Missouri once the levee broke and destroyed communities. So I saw an absolute catastrophic event, and maybe not catastrophic on a classic sense of a Hurricane Katrina, which this was definitely before that, and other large-scale events of similar size. But this was a months and months coming, and then it takes time for this flood to retract. But what was devastating, and these communities have never recovered, is that because of the socioeconomic position of these families and these communities, once their homes were destroyed, they abandoned them. The communities left, and these counties lost entire towns. And so there's a task force that was set up to help people remain and continue to stay in these small towns that get impacted by large catastrophic events. So as a catastrophic planner now, and with my focus on New Madrid earthquakes and Wabash Valley earthquakes, is I do go back to that time because I can revisit these places in and near my hometown where an event from almost 30 years ago still has a profound impact on communities that never came back. Families were, put all over the U.S. or went here and there, and these communities lost their history. So, as a catastrophic planner, I just have to remember those times and those families and the things that we did to try to keep that from happening again. We got to keep infrastructure in place, gas stations open, grocery stores open, teachers teaching in classrooms. And so, it's been a major influence, the historic flood of 1993. One of the things I'd like people to take away from this story is that just because of something happens to you in your life, it can impact you one of two ways. You can become a victim, or you can become a survivor. And watching my family lose their farmland and their crops and their homes and their farms, I watched them fight back, rebuild, and restore. And that was really, really profound for me as a person moving forward, and struggling to take on furthering my education, and wanting to do something to help my community and to help my country and in emergency management. So I would like to think that, that kid who was a fresh high school graduate, was right there along our National Guardsmen and women, sandbagging and working the levees. And when we lost the levee, we lost the fight, we immediately said, how will we rebuild? How will we move forward? So when we're facing catastrophic events and planning in my current career, that's in my mind, is how do we move forward?
Now it's time for some Q&A to help get additional preparedness insight. So it's time to talk earthquakes. With over 20,000 earthquakes occurring each year, it's one of the most prevalent events across the globe. The new Shake Alert system, operated by the U.S. Geological Survey in cooperation with the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network, can only detect earthquakes after they've begun. So not only are earthquakes frequent, they're also risky and hard to predict. It's a scary feeling that no matter how well you prepare, you can never really know when and where a dangerous earthquake could occur. Ground shaking from earthquakes can cause buildings and bridges to collapse. They can disrupt gas, electricity, and telephone services, and even sometimes trigger landslides, avalanches, flash floods, fires, and tsunamis. So all this begs the question, what's the best way we can prepare for them? Let's go ahead and introduce our guest today on the show. We have Sara Homan, a senior emergency management planner at Spin Global. Sara has over 15 years of emergency management planning experience from the local to federal level while focusing on catastrophic earthquake response and recovery planning. How are you doing today, Sara? I can tell
I'm
by
doing
your laughing.
great.
I can tell by your laughing that
I'm like, I started working at 15 years old. So yeah, I'm just turned 30 this year.
we're so happy to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really going to enjoy this podcast episode.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Right. So let's go ahead and dive a little bit into some current events. So before we pick your brain, we want to go ahead and give our audience a little bit of information regarding earthquakes.
Sure.
So let's look at some recent events. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, there have already been nearly 50 significant earthquakes recorded around the world in 2021. Earthquakes are considered significant events, and they're determined by a combination of magnitude, the number of did you feel it responses, and pager alert levels. We've already seen significant and deadly earthquakes this year in Indonesia, Japan, New Zealand, the US, and many more. The world's greatest earthquake belt, the Circum-Pacific Seismic Belt, is found along the rim of the Pacific Ocean, where about 81% of our planet's largest earthquakes occur. It has earned the nickname Ring of Fire. Why do so many earthquakes originate in this region? The belt exists along boundaries of tectonic plates, where plates of mostly oceanic crust are sinking beneath another plate. However, there aren't many places on Earth that are not vulnerable to earthquakes. So it's important for us to know how to prepare and to respond to one. Well, let's go ahead and get our guest's perspective on how we can prepare for earthquakes. Now, Sara, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and it's going to be awesome to get your responses on these. So here's the first question. Sara, is there a way to predict earthquakes now?
Okay, no, there's not. Unfortunately, so we talk about there's two types of verbiage that gets used in earthquakes. It's prediction and forecasting. So it's important to understand that there's a difference. When we talk about the weather, we talk about we're predicting the weather, we're forecasting the weather, and it's pretty much the same thing. But when you're talking about predicting earthquakes as opposed to forecasting is what they do in that ring of fire that you were talking about. We know that there's a certain percentage of earthquakes that are going to occur in a certain period of time. It's very general. So predicting is we know the date, we know basically the how large the earthquake is going to be and things like that. So it is very different. The vernacular is different than that you'd see in other terms. So unfortunately, what we're talking about short-term predictions, they're not possible at this time.
I see. Well, has there been any innovation in the world of earthquake forecasting by any chance?
Well, that type of information is definitely found out, like you said, the USGS is definitely the best place to go, or you can go to CUSIC, which is the Central U.S. Consortium on Earthquakes. Got that acronym a little bit wrong, but they have the most up-to-date information. But honestly, when I was doing a little research not long ago, honestly, the last stuff we saw was in September of 2016 as far as predictions and forecasting.
I see.
Like they say, this is not about, oh, I got goosebumps or I get heartburn right before an earthquake's going to occur. It doesn't work that way. So interestingly enough, if you go to the USGS website, you can actually see that we average about between 30 to 40 earthquakes a day across the world.
Wow. And
those are at a 2.5 magnitude or higher. So they're happening all over the world, all at the same time. It's just the earth relieving its pressure, right? So what makes one place more active than another? Pressure.
Oh man,
and that's about as much science as you're going to get from me today.
I just said this is a little unrelated, but I wanted to ask you a question real quick. Have you experienced an earthquake yourself before, and how did you?
Oh, it's so cool. Yeah, I did actually. I was a little kid, and maybe this is how it started. I don't know. We're having a revelation right now. I was laying on the floor and in the basement of my parents' home, and I was a little kid. And I was watching television, and I remember just this weird feeling of just moving on a concrete floor. And I remember my mom and my dad, my brother, we all kind of looked at each other, and my dad just was like, "Oh, it must have been an earthquake." And I was like, "What could have done that?" And to realize that something had occurred so far away, and we felt it to that extent. And little did I know it was something that was occurring in New Madrid, which would subsequently overtake and control my entire life and be my life's passion.
Wow.
Is the New Madrid Seismic Zone, and there's my way of introducing it into this conversation.
No, I was asking because I was curious, because I remember the first time I even experienced an earthquake. I'm not sure what age it was, but it was definitely here in Rockville, Maryland. And I was living with my mother at the time. And I remember sitting on the toilet, and I was freaked out because as soon as I felt that shake, I'm not sure what the magnitude was at the time, but I was freaking out because I was like, this is the first time I've ever experienced an earthquake in my life. I don't know what to do. I rushed out of the bathroom, rushed outside. I saw a whole bunch of people outside, and I was probably like the only guy, unfortunately, who was underdressed because I had just gotten off the toilet. So it was pretty embarrassing for me.
Okay.
That's just the funny side story right there.
Here's the truth. Okay. When you are a person who does this for a living, I sleep prepared, right? I'm a full pajama set kind of person because you have to be ready at all times, right? So we want to talk about preparedness, which is because they say that this is a non-notice event, which means it can occur at any time without notice. Well, the fact that we're aware of it makes it it is a notice event. We know it's possible. It's always possible. So here's just a few things that I like about planning for earthquakes, because it actually prepares you for all disasters. So for the United States, there's a couple big catastrophic actually type events that can occur that will affect the entire United States. So one thing to say is, and I know that everyone is sick to death of this word COVID, but one thing that COVID has taught me as a catastrophic planner is now I've seen what cascading effects truly are. And cascading effects are things that occur after the initial incident has occurred. So with COVID, we saw a disruption in supply chain. We saw a disruption in production of food. We saw production of a lot of different things. And so that's the same type of disruption that you would see occur after something like New Madrid, but it's also going to affect our power grid, which is probably the most significant. So what a lot of people don't understand is because this little town in Missouri, New Madrid, and down in Arkansas, this little area, that the power that would be disrupted would go all the way to, let's say, your mom's house in Maryland. So The disruption would be quite large. And the main hub for FedEx is in Memphis, Tennessee, which would be predicted to be basically underground if a 7.7 magnitude earthquake were to occur. So that would disrupt. I mean, this has global implications, just like COVID. So as a planner, we look at instances like COVID and say, wow, we actually have a global pandemic. So now we can actually apply that and actually be better planners, which is really exciting.
Most definitely. Definitely. So why should I care about earthquakes where I live in particular? I mean, I don't live anywhere near a seismic zone. So help me understand why I should care about them.
Well, just like I said, I mean, like, because an earthquake would occur here, and I would feel it here in the central US, like I said, it's going to have implications that are going to be global and eventually reach all across the world, because we're disrupting the supply chain in the United States. So the Army Corps of Engineers released a study that just tree debris alone after a 7.7 magnitude earthquake in the Reelfoot Rift area would deposit enough tree debris, just organic debris, that it would take over a year just to clear that and make the Mississippi River available for commerce again. That's not talking about bridges, cars, and the amount of commerce that travels up and down the Mississippi River is absolutely mind-boggling. And a lot of that information is all available online. I won't bore anybody with all that. But like, just disturbing the river, not to mention when you lose your bridges, you're cutting the country in half. So even though you don't feel the shake, you're going to feel it in many different ways. Just because you did not get COVID doesn't mean you haven't been affected by it. So it's the same thing. A couple of the things that are really, really simple as far as like even just things you could do to be earthquake ready is never let your gas tank get below half. That's something that's always really, really important. That's one, good for your vehicle, as my dad told me when I was little. Number two is that's the first thing people rush for. Well, that and toilet paper. Which you should also always keep on hand, right? So always remember, like, always don't be one of those people like me who knows better but seems to like to get to that do the get it to the E line and then go. But yeah, that's one simple thing you can do to make your life a little bit easier, because that's the first thing people go for is going to be gas.
I see. So tell me, what has surprised you the most in your experience with regards to promoting earthquake awareness?
People don't know. I think it's because you get so used to being to knowing it, living it, breathing it, talking about it. I was at the Illinois State Fair, and I was in the governor's tent, and I was speaking to people coming through the tent about earthquake awareness, because Illinois, which is where I live right now, I've lived in many of the New Madrid states. There's 7, but anyway, so I've lived in many of them doing earthquake planning and such, and I've been in 4 FEMA regions and stuff. And so I was there, I was talking to them, and the kids knew.
Wow.
And the kids were like, yeah, like, and they were like filling in my blanks, and their parents would just stand there like, what?
It must have been embarrassing.
It was like, and I'm like, these kids were geeked, you know what I mean? They were really excited about it, and their parents were like, I've never heard of New Madrid. And I'm like, how is this even possible?
Wow.
On a recent trip last October, actually was my first time in a very long time. I was actually able to go down to New Madrid. And I'll tell you what, I get jacked down there. I really do. Wow. You can see physical markers on the ground from actually the 1811, 1812 earthquakes. So wow. Here's one interesting thing I think people need to remember. An earthquake just doesn't happen. And then it's, okay, everybody, let's start rebuilding. It's going to take about, 100 years to rebuild. But what happens is the earth shook for 2 years. 2 years. So we can't even begin to rebuild our critical infrastructure, because we're going to have aftershocks that are larger than the actual event itself. So my daughter was actually, she was quizzing me on this because she's in school for emergency management. So she was kind of quizzing me and she's kind of schooled me a little bit. But these aftershocks are going to be so disruptive that we will not be able to start rebuilding our critical infrastructure for who knows how long.
Wow.
And that's what people don't understand or how to plan for. That's the difference between catastrophic planning and just planning in general, is understanding the cascading effects and how the disaster is different than another disaster.
I see. Well, let me go. That leads me into my next question, because I actually want to be able to give off this question before we hop into the next segment. What can the average person do to make sure that their state is earthquake prepared?
Okay, so they have the Great Shakeout. Everybody can participate. It's really an exciting thing. It's the second Thursday of every month. Of October, the second Thursday of October. Can't quite recall what's going to be this year, but I think you could probably take care of that. Put a little banner here at the bottom. So the Great Shakeout, basically, it has occurred every year. Every state participates. It's schools. It's across the entire United States and the world. And basically, it's a day where we educate ourselves on it, on earthquake preparedness, and then at the same exact time, everyone, of course, shelters in place. And then now, of course, we live in a social media world. We hashtag. We have certain hashtags to use, and you show who your shakeout buddy was. So
Nice.
The other thing is to make sure that your state is active. So we're really into making sure that our politicians and stuff like that are listening to us. The other thing is to make sure that emergency management is important in your state, and that your emergency management agency is taking earthquake preparedness seriously, because every state does have an earthquake program manager, or should. And so just making sure, and of course you can go to the USGS or the QSIC websites, and we can of course apply those or provide those. You can actually find out if your state is ready.
Nice. I like that. Well, Sarah, we're going to go ahead and dive into our next segment right now. It's called the Planet Ready Up segment. This is going to give our audience an opportunity to get to know you on a personal level. So I'm going to ask you a few hilarious questions right now. Give me your best responses. Knock them out of the park.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's go ahead and get started.
Okay.
First scenario. I'm going to be giving you two scenarios.
Okay.
Here's the first scenario. How would you act in this instance? So an earthquake begins to split the floor beneath your feet in your office building. On one side of your room is an unfinished peanut butter jelly sandwich sitting on top of a table. And on the other side is a backpack hanging on the wall with your phone in it. Which side do you jump to, Sarah?
Well, knowing what I know, I would go for the unfinished peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Great.
Let me tell you why.
Yeah, break it down.
I don't carry a backpack. No, but I probably should. So the reason I would go for the unfinished peanut butter and jelly sandwich is because I don't know if I'm going to be trapped in the building. Self-service will not be working at all in my scenario, which is the 7.7 magnitude earthquake for New Madrid, right? So I know that self-service will not be available. And so I know that unfinished sandwich is actually very high in protein and might be the last thing I eat for an extended period of time if I'm not crushed to death in the building.
Wow. I didn't even see it that way. The only thing that was going through my head was I need my phone so I can call somebody to come get me.
Your phone's not going to work, bro.
Right?
It's it. What are you going to do with that? You going to eat that?
Oh, man.
Good luck.
You're right. All right. Second scenario.
I'm a survivor.
All right. Let's see what you got for this one. So let's say you're in your apartment and you feel an earthquake. You turn on the news to find that there was a small magnitude earthquake that occurred, and it was also reported that an aftershock may occur as well. But you also remember that your Uber Eats driver is downstairs, and he told you he won't wait another minute to give you your meal because he's probably terrified himself. Do you go to meet him, or do you wait for the aftershock?
Well, based on my previous answer, I think we know how this is going to go. So I would go, and if I'm me and myself, if I'm getting Uber Eats, I'm definitely going to go get Uber Eats so I can get my driver out of there. But an aftershock is not guaranteed. We don't know when it's going to occur, have the severity of the aftershock. But like, again, they can't predict that, right? They can forecast that it's going to happen based on whatever. But I would definitely go get my Uber Eats. And because I don't know if that's going to be my last meal or not.
Right.
I want to go down with my, with my Uber Eats order, and and maybe I could, I don't know, save my Uber Eats driver.
For me, it depends. Like if it's McDonald's, I don't know, but if it's Jersey Mike's, okay, I just might be able to compromise there.
Well, I was actually going to say it's probably a horseshoe, but if you're not from the Springfield, Illinois area, you don't know what a horseshoe is. So you're like, what?
No idea.
Again, this is all about understanding, just this could be your last meal, period. This could be your last meal for a long time. And aftershocks aren't guaranteed when or where, just like earthquakes.
You're right.
So I think you wrote these questions probably before lunch, I'm assuming. So
I was very hungry. No shade to McDonald's at all, but or Jersey Mike's. I love them both. Anyway, let's go ahead and hop off. Thanks so much for being on this episode, Sarah. I greatly appreciate it. I want to give her a special thanks again, Sara Homan, an emergency management planner at Spin Global. Thank you so much for being on the show today. Hopefully we can bring you back on so you can talk a lot more about how we can prepare for earthquakes in the future. This was awesome.
Thank you.
All right. And I also want to give a special thanks to our audience for tuning in today. You see, these episodes wouldn't be possible without you guys. So we want to be able to thank you all so much for tuning in, and we hope that you all tune in to the next episode of the Planet Ready podcast. In the meantime, we hope you get ready for it. You've been listening to the Planet Ready podcast, proudly brought to you by Spin Global, a public benefit corporation that exists to disrupt disasters from neighborhoods to nations. Do you have questions or a topic you'd like us to explore? You can reach us at podcast@spinglobal.org. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at Planet Ready by Spin Global. Don't forget to visit planetready.com and prepare yourself and your community on the world's premier online disaster risk reduction and emergency preparedness platform.